señor tenía ganas de un café y yo puse a hervir el agua. Y ya después que la dejé, no lo hice en ese momento. Pero ya después, cuando yo iba a volverla ya a ver el agua, a ver cómo estaba, ya estaba la ollita como del color del cobre, como anaranjada y olía muy feo.
There's many Flint, Michigans throughout the country. In California, we also have a Flint, Michigan, and it's been here for over a decade.
I stand right here today to ask you to stand. Become what your children may want you to be in this fight for clean, safe, and affordable water.
Communities from throughout the state came together and demanded that as a state we declare that it's a basic human right that all Californians deserve to have access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water no matter where they live in the state.
Water has been a great source of division. The politics of water have been fought for decades. We have places in this valley where people rely on bottled water for their daily diet. And in some places where, people have difficulty washing their clothes because of the poor quality of the water. And in some places, it's just not the poor quality of the water. They simply don't have access to water.
On paper, there's a human right to water. In practice, there are up to 1 million people in the state of California that don't have access to safe drinking water.
The vast majority of these systems that don't provide safe drinking water are found in communities of low income, people of color, where hardworking families are having to pay twice for water, for a toxic water bill, and on top of that are having to buy additional drinking water just to have safe drinking water in the home.
In the city, they say they have good water, and they get to drink their water. They get to use their water for cook, and we can't.
Some things we can live without, but we can't live without water.
The geography would give the name if it were an APN with additional steps.
Communities I've worked with in the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley face a range that goes from arsenic, nitrate, 123 TCP, hexavalent chromium, uranium up in the hills. Those are the ones we see most often. Uranium's naturally occurring, so it occurs up in the foothills in the San Joaquin Valley and ends up in drinking water just like arsenic.
We have a major problem, which is the water, contaminated with arsenic water. Of course, when I came here, I didn't know that. A lot of us did not know that. The word arsenic is rat poisoning. I mean, we didn't know anything, so we started asking questions, but apparently it's a contaminant that if you boil it, you make coffee, you make tea, you boil whatever, your dumplings, whatever, it concentrates. Arsenic concentrates when you boil the water.
Arsénico y el problema de la salud de las personas, en principal los niños y los ancianos.
Arsenic is a naturally occurring contaminant, but primarily low-income communities haven't been able to access the funding resources they need to be able to afford to both build and run the treatment plants necessary to treat arsenic.
Pues es la situación, pues, de lo que te digo, que aquí el agua está, pues, con mal olor, mal sabor y está amarillenta. Y no sirve, pues, para tomar ni para... Como para lavar una verdura, una fruta, necesitas una agua limpia que vas y compras de allá en garrafón. Si no tienes, pues vas a usar una botellita.
I know that our water might be contaminated with a 123 TCP, and we're afraid to drink the water. To me, sometimes I don't even feel safe buying water bottle because I don't know what's in the water bottle either. I don't know where the water's coming from. So it might be the same kind of water we have, you know, it's just in a plastic bottle, and we're paying extra for the plastic.
From what I've learned these last couple of months is that my water actually has 123 TCP. My parents actually don't use the faucet water and they don't allow us to use the faucet water, but sometimes we do use it, for example, to boil eggs or to put it into our oatmeal, and we boil the water and then we drink it or we eat it. And so these are things that we don't really think about. We just think the water's dirty with dirt, for example, but we don't think that it has chemicals that we can't see.
123 TCP is actually in a lot of areas in the Central Valley. It sticks in drinking water, so it's still in drinking water in a lot of systems and private wells. So it's something that's out there and it's not going away anytime soon.
Water, in terms of the source, set quality aside for a moment, can either be locally developed in nature, statewide developed in nature, or federally developed in nature. And in some cases, they're a combination of all three, in which you have projects that have been developed on the local, the state, at the federal level, and they share in that water resource based upon how the project was envisioned, how the financing was set up, and how they predetermined based upon the financing who would get what share of the allocation of the water supply that provides. And actually there's a fourth kind of water that we have that we don't talk about that much, and that's groundwater.
Groundwater is water that's stored below the surface in underground aquifers, which are relatively deep and thick areas where the water fills the spaces between soil particles, and that water can be drawn up by wells. In many places in the San Joaquin Valley, those wells might be 700 or 800 feet deep now. As the water level has receded over time, as we've drawn increasingly on that groundwater.
At the moment, it's not a working system. We don't have enough water for everybody. We are running out of water, so the local residents are finding that their wells are drying due to the over pumping of the aquifer for agricultural purposes. As a result of the excessive groundwater pumping, we also have issues such as land subsidence. The ground is sinking in some areas, depending on what the ground is made of. Some of the fine clays that make the ground, the bottom of the valley, once they are dewatered, once we remove the water from these layers, the clays collapse and lose volume. And these fine particles will not gain their volume back due to the pressure, the weight of the material that's above them.
This is such a big problem when you look at it. And you look at groundwater contamination that has been, I don't know, ignored or let go for decades. And now we are where we are, and there are, 300 systems in the state of California that exceed in terms of some contaminant or another.
Different types of contaminants can result in exposures in different ways. So a lot of pesticides, for example, that are found in groundwater often can be absorbed through the skin or in showers. And so in those cases, you shouldn't even be showering with water that has high levels of those contaminants. Every community that has a contaminant over the legal limit, nobody wants to have to turn on their tap and be nervous about whether, their child is going to be exposed, their guests or friends that come into their household are going to be exposed to contaminants.
La utilizamos para bañarnos, para lavar y para regar las plantas. Pues te imaginas si compramos agua limpia para bañarnos. Jala, ru, 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 patitas de burro. Jala, raca, raca, patitas de urraca. Jala, reque, reque, patitas de reque. Jala, rucu, rucu, patitas de rucu. Pues no me siento muy a gusto como para ella que está chiquita porque como está muy contaminada. Pero pues no tengo el suficiente dinero para andar comprando agua limpia para bañarla. Como por decir un galón, pues no. Como la baño cada tercer día o luego pues cuando está más caliente el tiempo, la baño todos los días. Pero pues yo no tengo pues el dinero para ir a andar comprando agua limpia para bañarla. Y pues tengo que agarrar agua del zinc para bañarla y no me siento muy a gusto. Porque pues ya como que ahorita se le cayó ese ombligo, pero de todos modos cuando todavía lo tenía me daba más pendiente porque como estaba...
Si tomas esta agua de aquí, te da diarrea, dolor de cabeza y ronchera en el cuerpo, granos. Te salen problemas en el cuerpo. Y realmente mucha gente se está enfermando, se está muriendo. Es una muerte silenciosa porque si no tienen en realidad el agua para tomarla, pues la tienen que tomar.
This is sad. We need to find long-term solutions. Our representatives, they need to start working in a long-term solution for everybody.
The overwhelming majority of Californians and people I think throughout this country think water is just always there and it's always good, and it gets, I think, more challenging because they believe that food comes from a grocery store, and it doesn't. I mean, the food goes to the grocery store, and that's usually where most people get their food, but it actually comes from a farm.
California agriculture currently uses 3/4 of the state's developed water supply, and a lot of that water is used to grow low-value, water-intensive crops, like alfalfa, for example, which alone uses 15% of the state's developed water supply, and half of it is grown for export. In a sense, we're exporting our water when we export these crops.
In terms of water limits and availability limits, on a day in and day out basis, most of the growers I work with are just struggling to survive. Putting a new well might cost more than $1 million to get down to 1,600 feet. And that's how deep some of them try to get groundwater. They try to purchase it on the water market, but not every ranch is next to a canal, and so they can't all have water deliveries. As some of the farmers say, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting.
Nitrate contamination is primarily from agricultural activities, including fertilizer and manure, and for decades the state pretty much gave a waiver of groundwater protection requirements to agricultural industries in the state. And recently, the state, because of community advocacy, the state has enacted widespread groundwater protection programs, but it's taking a while to get those up to where they need to be to fully protect groundwater quality. Nitrate is not a new contaminant. We've had the same standards in place since the 70s, but over decades we've been applying fertilizers and manures that have leached into our groundwater and resulted in hundreds of communities not having access to safe drinking water.
Our water is getting more contaminated, and it seems like The farmers and the people that contaminate our water, all they talk about is we're growing food for everybody. You know, that it's okay to contaminate water because they're growing food, but it's not okay, you know, because they're killing us.
My parents, they're factory workers and they don't understand the chemicals. So if you show them a bottled water that's dirty and a bottled water that has chemicals, but it's clear, they'll still pick the chemical water. It makes me sad to think that my dad has potential to get cancer just because he's more vulnerable. So kids, for example, older adults, people that are always sick, and they don't know and they drink this water, it's concerning.
Our school has those old type of water fountain for the kids to drink. Our kids, I tell my kids not to drink the water from there. We send them with water bottle. Sometimes people, they rather give their kids soda or other drink because they think it's healthier than drinking water.
The legal standards that are set are usually a combination of public health standards, but then also bringing in economic and technical feasibility. So some standards are set at the same as the public health goal, so what would be purely health protective. But other standards, like arsenic, for example, the standards are set at a level that's not as protective because they deem it to not be economically feasible to treat it down to the health protective standard. And that makes it really hard for consumers to feel confident in the quality of the water that they're drinking.
The state's in the process of resetting a limit for hexavalent chromium. In the meantime, Tuleville is in a situation where it doesn't have safe drinking water, and it, for all intents and purposes, is within the limits set by the state of California. Letters actually went out to residents of Tuleville saying, your water is no longer exceeding state standards. So there is no state standard for hexavalent chromium, so they're not exceeding. And then we got a lot of questions at community meetings that week. So is the water safe to drink? The answer is no, the water isn't safe to drink. It's still the same water it was last week. The law has just changed.
Working with you to include more text to support sea salts and provide you some
Vamos a las campañas allá a Sacramento a luchar para que nos escuchen los senadores.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Consuelo Andrade, vengo de la Tony B que pertenece a la ciudad de Lindsay. Y luego, como somos de bajos ingresos, pues tenemos la necesidad de hacer la lucha a conseguir el dinero como podamos para traer el agua limpia para tomar.
Como ahora que fuimos le dijimos que vinimos a que nos apoye con este bill de agua. Y si no nos quieren apoyar, que tomen ellos esta agua.
People up in Sacramento don't necessarily realize what things look like on the ground out here. I think that actually seeing it and being in these communities is a different thing than hearing somebody say, I don't have drinking water.
We need to ensure that we have short-term and long-term strategies to bring about change into our communities. There is no universal solution for all of our communities, but there is a universal solution in terms of we all need safe drinking water, and it should be affordable. It's unrealistic to think that our hardworking families are having to pay some of the highest rates for toxic water. It's just not okay.
What are we leaving for our kids, in the future? What kind of water are they going to have, or only the rich people are going to be able to drink safe water?
It's a real environmental justice issue, and it's a situation that's David versus Goliath, because you have the local people who are generally poor and have less voice versus the large companies, the large agri-businesses. For local people, they have very little options. They can't necessarily move away because their job is right here. and usually tied to these agribusinesses. So how do you move away to protect your own health and the health of your family at the expense of potentially losing your job and moving away from your home, the land you've grown up on, or where you've been all your life?
We have to make better decisions with the limited amount that we have. We've got to try and stretch a drop out further if we're going to continue to increase the population, to remain a vibrant agricultural state.
We were in Tullyville in front of the Exeter City Council. Tullyville is a community that has had nitrate and hexavalent chromium issues and exceedances since the late 80s, really. So they have really, really bad water. And one of the city council members asked, given the water, why don't you move somewhere else? There were community residents there to speak. The answers, they were all some variation of, I was born in this community, this is my home, I shouldn't have to move, and oftentimes I don't have the option of moving.
Pues porque no tengo más a dónde irme, y aquí llegué, y aquí es donde nos hacemos vivir, de que vamos a trabajar al campo, en la agricultura. Por eso estamos aquí, porque pues yo aquí fue donde yo llegué y no conozco otro lado.
How is that going to fix the problem by me leaving? Then what's going to happen to the community? And there's not going to be a community, and there is not going to be a community for you to represent, so you're going to be without a job, because who are you going to represent? I'm the community. My house is not the community, I'm the community.
And I shouldn't have to leave because of this. People should make it so I can stay here, I can provide to this community, but this community should also provide for me.
Safe drinking water should be a basic right. It should never be a privilege. And it's not a matter of where you live and where you don't live. The reality is, clean water should flow from people's taps. The two safest places on earth where we need to be safe is at home and at school, and neither locations are safe in California.
Me siento triste y frustrada porque uno quisiera que hubiera un cambio inmediato, pero yo sé que es difícil porque muchas personas no creen que estamos en este problema, pero ya tienen, en realidad ya tienen la certificación de que está contaminada el agua. Que abra uno la llave del agua y que la pueda uno tomar. Es esto que yo quisiera.
When they eat an apple, when they eat an orange, when they eat a grape, think about me.
Esta niña linda que nació de noche, quiere que la lleven a pasear en coche. Porque es muy necesario tener agua limpia para todos los niños del futuro y para nosotros los humanos que estamos ya grandes, que estamos enfermos. Pues si ahorita uno que está grande está enfermo, ¿te imaginas un bebé en la panza o los que están recién nacidos? Por eso vamos a seguir luchando, a pedir ayuda para que nos apoyen, porque pues los niños son el futuro del mañana, y pues para ellos también, si no alcanzan a ver esos cambios, pues ya de menos que le hagan lucha, que los siga viendo para cuando ya tengan sus hijos ellos también.
I feel shame because we live in a country that it's supposed to be the best ahead of everything, you know, and everybody has problems with water, and this has been a long time issue that nobody has paid attention.
Clean drinking water is absolutely essential to a healthy community, to a healthy valley, and to a healthy nation. If we can't resolve our water challenges in this state, God help a lot of other parts of the country and parts of the world.
It's a slow motion train wreck. Our water supply is diminishing, our snowpack is diminishing, our groundwater supplies are being exhausted. At what point does the pain become great enough for the people who have power and influence to make these decisions to say, okay, we have to change the way we do business? I don't know where that threshold point is. I don't know if anyone knows, but it's coming.